They called him dangerous, they called him unfit for peace, a relic of war, a beast in human skin. But they never said it to his face, because when Kale looked at you, he made you remember your ancestors, made you remember the blood in your bones, the kind that sharpened rocks and set fire to the dark. He had survived 3 interstellar campaigns, 2 extermination attempts, and 1 betrayal so deep it carved silence into his soul, and still he stood unbroken, unrepentant. He walked alone through the polished halls of the Celestial Tribunal, escorted by 10 guards in exo-armor that did not make eye contact. The light above him was sterile and perfect, and he hated it. It was the light of people who had never fought for warmth, never killed for breath. The tribunal chamber was silent as he entered a vast glass dome, suspended in low orbit over the oceanic capital of the core worlds. It was a symbol of peace, of unity, of control, and it reeked of fear. The judges floated above the floor, encased in thought bubbles, data swimming around them. Faster than any eye could follow, they did not speak aloud, they did not acknowledge his presence. Instead, they communed silently, reaching a verdict that had been decided. Before he had even arrived, the words came through a synthetic voice, a machine translation of synthetic thought, cold, distant, final. The accused, Kale, designation Omega Unit, last survivor of Operation Ironfall, is hereby sentenced to exile on Veyrath 9 for crimes against the harmony of the Alliance and refusal to submit to peaceful recalibration. There was no protest, no appeal, no gasp from the crowd, because there was no crowd, only glass and silence, and the long corridor to the launch bay. His shackles were removed as they reached the pod. His armor was left behind, his weapons stripped, his name erased from the registry. He was no longer a soldier, no longer a citizen. He was a problem being erased, a mistake being buried beneath layers of hostile atmosphere and geological fury. They locked him into the descent pod, a rusting relic with failing stabilizers and a black box that had already been set to send the signal of death. He would arrive broken or not at all, and no one would care, no one would look back. They expected him to scream or threaten or curse them, like the others had, but Kale did not speak. As the doors closed, he simply smiled, the kind of smile that makes old wolves run and young lions kneel. The pod dropped a silent arc through the void, slamming into the gravity well of Veyrath 9 like a thrown stone through glass, and Kale watched the stars vanish above him, swallowed by fire and cloud and chaos. The screens flickered, red oxygen low, hull integrity failing, impact imminent. But he did not move, he did not pray. He had done all his dying already. This was not an end, this was a beginning. And far below, the storms of Veyrath 9 stirred, as if they knew something new was coming, something ancient, something angry, something human. The pod hit the surface like a meteor, and for a moment the world was only fire and noise. The outer hull vaporized on entry, and the shock dampeners failed on impact. Kale was thrown against the restraints hard enough to taste blood. The door hissed once and failed to open, so he kicked it until the frame cracked, and the world outside came pouring in. Heat slammed into him first, then whined like claws ripping at his skin, followed by air so thin and toxic it made his lungs seize. He stumbled from the wreckage, already half blind, already blistering. The sky was a bruise of swirling colors, the ground black glass split by rivers of acid, and the rain came sideways hard enough to cut every drop a dagger. The first breath made him drop to a knee, but the second was easier, and the third came with a growl, because he was still alive, and that meant the planet had failed. He crawled to higher ground on hands and knees where the land arched into jagged spines, and there he saw it, not just the storm, not just the ruin, but the shape of the ecosystem, the way the land fed the weather, and the predators fed on each other, a cycle of constant war, of endless death. And something in him smiled at that, not because it was beautiful, but because it made sense. When the first creature came, it moved like smoke and light, barely seen except for its teeth, a serpent with too many eyes and too few bones. It struck fast. But Kale was faster. He let it sink fangs into his arm, then drove a shard of the pod into its neck again and again until it stopped twitching. The venom burned, but he kept breathing, because pain was not new and death was not new, and everything in his blood told him this was where he belonged. He dragged the carcass back to a shallow cave, a hollowed ribcage of some long-dead beast, where the wind howled but could not reach, and he stripped the serpent down with bare hands, fingers blistered and raw, and built fire the old way, spark and friction and rage, until flame caught and grew, and the warmth pushed back the death for a while. He sat there wrapped in alien skin, the cave lit with flickering flame, and watched the shadows outside where more things waited, curious or hungry or afraid. And he whispered, "Let them come, because the worst thing on this world just woke up, and he is not ready to die, not now, not ever." By dawn the storm had changed direction, and the screams in the distance had faded or grown bored, and Kale was still there, still bleeding, still breathing, and he stood tall atop the ridge looking down at the twisted terrain. And he knew the planet had not tried its best yet. It had sent a whisper, not a roar. It had tested, not attacked. And he growled back with teeth bared and said, "Try harder." Because this was not his prison, not his grave, not his execution. This was his proving ground. The days on Veyrath 9 did not pass. They hunted, they stalked and clawed at the edges of sanity. The sun never truly rose. It only glared through the thick clouds for a few hours at a time, casting everything in a sick light that made blood look black and shadows look alive. Kale stopped counting hours, stopped measuring days, because time here was not a rhythm. It was a challenge. Every breath earned, every step a gamble. He moved through the land like something half dead, and half god. Skin burned, then calloused, muscles torn, then hardened. He learned the terrain by feel, by instinct, mapping predator nests, thermal vents, acid bogs, and magnetic pits. With a mind sharpened by pain, he followed storm paths, watched where the lightning struck, and noticed something strange. The weather changed when he moved. It started small, wind shifting away from his fires, rain breaking early around his shelters, storms flaring when he was cornered, then stopping when he stepped out from hiding. It was as if the planet was reacting to him, studying him, not to kill him, but to learn from him, or perhaps to challenge him in ways more personal. And that idea, that impossible thought, did not scare him, it thrilled him. He began to speak to the land, not with words, but with fire and blood and motion. He built totems from bones, left them where he had won battles. He carved marks into cliff faces and buried the hearts of predators under cairns of volcanic stone. And each time he returned, something had changed. The wind different, the gravity lighter, the creatures less frenzied, as if they remembered him. Veyrath was not a world, it was not terrain and weather, it was not mindless, it was ancient, awake, watching Kale as he adapted, as he became something more than what had fallen from the sky. And the planet responded by sending newer threats, things with memory, things that stalked not for hunger, but for strategy. Kale fought them all, and survived not through strength alone, but through something deeper, human rage, human love for the fight. He hunted the hunters, learning their patterns, disrupting their nests, feeding false trails into the land itself, until the predators began to avoid him, and when they did not, he broke them with traps built from alien spine and stone, sharpened into weapons with nothing but willpower and time. By the end of the third cycle, Kale stood atop a volcanic ridge, where no sensor drone had ever survived, and shouted into the acid winds that he was still here, that he was not prey, not mistake, not meat, and something deep beneath the surface answered not in words, but in a shift in silence, as if the planet had blinked. He left that place, changed not just in body, but in spirit, no longer an exile, no longer a man defined by war or punishment, but something new, something raw, something wild. And the world watched him go, its storms gentler, its monsters quieter, as if unsure whether to fear him or follow him. Kale did not care either way, because he was just getting started. The sky cracked open again, but this time it was not a storm that fell, it was fire and metal, and screaming. It was another pod, another exile, this one crashing into the bone fields northeast of the basalt cliffs, where Kale had carved his first shelter. He watched from a distance, eyes narrow, body still, heart cold, because he knew what this meant. The Alliance had started sending more, not to kill the planet, but to bury more problems on it, problems like him. He waited until night, when the lesser beasts hunted and the real monsters slept, then approached, silent, fast, with a blade in hand, not out of fear, but to make a point. The exile was still alive, barely, a woman half dead, wrapped in shredded jumpsuit, with burns across her face, and a broken leg, already trying to stand, already fighting. And Kale saw it, the thing he remembered from mirrors long shattered. He dragged her back to shelter without a word, and when she woke he offered her two choices, learn or die. She chose to learn, so he taught her the way the wind moved before a quake, the scent of stone before it melted, the call of the deathbirds, and how to silence them with a spike to the throat. Within a week, she could kill. Within a month, she could track. Within 2, she was hunting beside him. More came, pods falling like cursed stars, some already dead, some begging, some feral. Kale did not ask who they were, only what they would become. He gave the same choice each time, learn or die. And many died, but those who stayed became something more. They blood, they broke, they burned, and they rebuilt until they were fast and smart and cruel in all the right ways. He led them through the storms, through enemy territory, through regions the planet itself seemed to hate, and each time they came out alive they built from the wreckage, and from the bones of things that had no names, shaping walls and weapons and armor that screamed when struck. They used the carcasses of sky beasts as shelters, used the venom of cave crawlers as medicine, and their fortress grew not up but out into the land like roots made of wrath. Kale never called himself leader, never asked for loyalty, never gave speeches. He only fought and survived, and that was enough, because survival on Veyrath 9 was holy, and anyone who could teach you to survive was more than king. He was proof of something greater. They began calling him warlord, not out of reverence, but out of recognition, because when the storms rose they looked to him, and when the monsters attacked they stood behind him, and when the planet itself shifted its bones to throw them off cliffs or into lava, he held the line, and the line held. They were no longer exiles, no longer prisoners, no longer mistakes sent to be erased. They were Cal's people, and the planet was starting to learn their names. They had taken hell and turned it into a home, and now they were building something new. A kingdom made of fury and survival. And Veyrath had begun to bow. The Alliance said nothing at first, no reports, no probes, no acknowledgement. They thought Veyrath would swallow its exiles like it always had, but the silence broke when a signal reached the core. A drone's eye, blackened and fractured, sent from a courier ship that never returned. It showed images no one believed, towers of bone and steel, rising from volcanic earth, warriors in armor stitched from nightmare skin, and at the center of it all a human standing atop a spire as the storm coiled around him like a crown. They sent a scout team, next a dozen elite equipped with mech suits and orbital backup trained for planetary warfare. Their orders were simple: confirm termination status, retrieve any black box data, and if possible identify the source of the anomaly. They landed 3 clicks from Cal's fortress, cloaked in energy dampeners and silence, but Veyrath does not forget, and Cal had eyes even in the ash. He met them at the crater edge alone and unarmed, and told them to turn back. They laughed and raised their weapons, and then the sky turned black, and the ground screamed, and the world itself betrayed them one by one. They vanished into flame, into shadow, into the jaws of things they could not name, until only one remained, and Kale let him live with a message carved into his arm: send more, and I will return the pieces. Send an army, and I will raise a world. The Alliance did not respond, not officially, but Kale knew he had their attention, not just the suits in the high towers, but the ones behind them, the ones who decide who lives and who is forgotten. They saw what he had built, and they feared it, because Veyrath was never meant to hold life, only erase it, and now it had a people and a warlord and a purpose. The next wave came, faster, deadlier drones, shaped like gods, weapons older than recorded time. Cal watched them descend and raised his hand, and the fortress responded. Lightning caught in spires, plasma drawn into spears and released in fury, and his people fought like the damned, risen like demons, and the sky burned for 7 days. When it ended, the land was scared deeper than before. The towers cracked, the bones blackened, but they stood. Cal stood, and his people howled at the broken sky, not in mourning, but in defiance, because they had survived again, because they would always survive, because survival was not their curse, it was their right. He sent the wreckage back in pieces, wired into orbit, bound for the core, with a message written in the old language, the one from before unity, before diplomacy, the language of conquest and blood. We are not your prisoners, we are your future. Now the stars whisper his name, not in fear, but in mourning, because Cal does not kneel, Cal does not beg, Cal does not die. And if the Alliance wants war, they will not find it in the stars, they will find it in the storm they abandoned long ago. A storm that wears a crown. The Alliance never returned, not in the way Kel expected. They did not send another fleet or wave of soldiers to reclaim Veyrath 9. They did not come in strength to take the planet back. Instead, they sent a message, a simple coded transmission, one line that echoed through the black silence of Kel's stronghold. The humans are not a threat, they are a mistake. The warlord is no longer needed, return him to us, and we will forget this happened. Kel stood at the edge of his kingdom. The towering spires of bone and metal stretched beyond the horizon, his people moving like shadows in the streets, building, growing, thriving. And for a moment he thought of the core worlds, the soft touch of polished walls, the flickering screens and empty words. But then he heard the roar of the sky beasts and the hum of his people's weapons being forged, and he smiled because he knew they were wrong. He did not answer their message, he did not need to. Instead, he stood in the center of his kingdom and watched as more ships fell from the sky, not as weapons, not as threats, but as refugees, those who had heard the whispers, those who had seen the broadcasts, those who had abandoned the softness of the core and chosen the fury of Veyrath. And Kel took them in without a word, without hesitation, because they had chosen this place, they had chosen him. The planet responded to them too, as it had to him. The winds shifted as if to welcome them, the beasts quieted as if to recognize them. The storms themselves seemed to soften their blows, and Kel knew what this meant. The planet was no longer just surviving, it was growing, it was becoming something alive, something with a heartbeat, and that heartbeat was his own. The warlords of the Alliance sent more drones, and these drones were different. They were not just machines, they were ambassadors. They were messengers. They came to Kel and knelt before him and begged for peace. They begged for the human who had turned a graveyard of a planet into a kingdom to return to the fold, to stop his defiance. And Kel looked at them with eyes that had seen enough death to fill stars, and he said no. The planet belonged to him now, and it belonged to those who fought to survive alongside him, and it would never bow to the soft chains of the core again. Kel had no need for peace, he had no need for the empty promises of the galaxy's leaders, because he had something they did not. He had the land, he had the fury, and he had the truth that nothing survives unless it fights for its right to live. He placed his hand on the shattered stone of his throne, a seat built from the bones of the beasts that had once hunted him, and he looked to the horizon, where the storms still churned, but now they were his storms. Now they were the storms of a king and his kingdom, and Kel knew he had conquered something greater than any world, any empire, any government. He had conquered the very heart of survival itself. And as the first rays of the long-hidden sun broke through the clouds, Kel stood tall above his people, the warlord, the king, the human who had turned hell into a home, and he looked up to the sky and dared anyone to try and take it from him. Because Veyrath 9 was no longer a prison. It was a kingdom.